UPS announced Tuesday it will lay off 12,000 employees. That's about 2% of its workforce, according to figures from the Wall Street Journal. The Journal reports most of the layoffs will affect individuals in contract and management roles. UPS joins several high-profile companies that have recently announced layoffs, among them Xerox, Wayfair, and Amazon. Amazon and UPS are also among companies mandating office employees to return to in-person work. To understand these events in the context of the labor market, we've asked Guy Berger to join us. He's the Director of Economic Research at Burning Glass Institute, which focuses on policy and research related to American workers. So, Guy, how should we think about these layoffs at these big companies, names people know? Seems like big numbers, but the unemployment rate is 3.7%, which is low. How should we think about these?
Well, John, I think the main thing to remember to start with is the U.S. economy is really big. The flows are enormous. 2023 was the year with the third lowest layoffs on record, and we still had 1.5 million layoffs a month, almost 20 million for the whole year. So within that context, these numbers alone are high profile, but they're small. And I think the question, which we haven't seen it materialize, is whether these sort of drip of high profile layoffs start adding up to a bigger wave of layoffs, but we don't see it yet.
And when the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates to slow economic activity, was the expectation that by now, a good while after that rate rising period began, that expectation would be where it is, or is it lower than people expected? Because there was some expectation it would go up as the economy cooled, right?
Yeah, I think we've been amazingly lucky that inflation's come down. It's basically in recent months where the Fed wants it in the long run. And at the same time, the impact on the unemployment rate has been very small to nearly negligible. Now, the risk is that we're sort of near a tipping point, and we haven't seen it yet, but in early this year, maybe it starts creeping up. But I'm really crossing my fingers that we get lucky, and instead of it being just a small positive impact on unemployment, we don't see any at all. Let's cross our fingers. That'd be amazing.
Let me ask you about these policies of having people come back to in-person work. Is kind of a point of friction that I think tells us something about the labor market. You tell me, because when employees are hard to find, employers say, sure, work from home, do what you need, I want to keep you. But when jobs are hard to find, employees say, okay, I'll show up all day long because I may not be able to get another job or go somewhere else. Do you see these companies that are saying you got to come in and work full time as illustrative of anything in particular that's happening in the labor market?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that if you think about it, this working from home, remote, hybrid work was this benefit that's highly desired by employees that became prevalent during the pandemic and stuck around afterwards. Employers and bosses seem more reluctant to hand it out, but it's part of this bargaining that's going on between workers and employers. And as the labor market's cooled somewhat, with hiring coming down, employers are becoming less generous offering that. And so employees are finding that it's harder for them to keep hold of that benefit. And employers, do have the leverage to bring people back.
So as we look ahead through this year, what trends are you looking at? What in terms of the employment market, the labor market, what are you looking for to tell us how it might be faring?
Well, on the optimistic side, we've seen hiring come down a lot. It's been fortunate we've seen it through the lens of hiring coming down, not layoffs picking up. But this is not a great time to be looking for a job. And hopefully we see that stop. That, to me, will be a very good sign that, in some sense, employers have right-sized their workforces and we can start being really optimistic about the labor market and not just kind of holding on to our seats. And on the flip side, I think if we start seeing that the layoffs are so far just mostly headlines and relatively small numbers, start moving the meter on aggregate layoffs, that will make me a little more worried that policymakers are falling behind the curve in terms of loosening the pressure they're putting on the labor market.
Do you see anything in these layoffs that are, because UPS, for example, big spike in people's using of shipping during the pandemic. Do you see in these layoffs anything that's particular to the recent period we've been in, or is it pretty much kind of companies making the same kinds of business decisions about the future, about expansion, about contraction, that are kind of basic meat and potato business decisions?
It's a really interesting question. So the first thing is we are seeing, and I think this has been sort of a trend, is a lot of these layoffs are concentrated in sectors that, for a variety of reasons, really or expanded a lot during the pandemic. I think that's, the tech sector stands out as one. Another one is the logistics sector, like UPS. The other thing that's interesting is I think that the term white collar recession gets thrown around way too loosely. I don't think there's any sort of recession. But one of the sectors of employment that's been generally the softest, where employment has come down, is people with advanced degrees. We've seen that cool off somewhat, unlike other categories like people with just bachelor's degrees or people with high school diplomas. So that story about managerial chains getting narrowed may reflect that, like, actually where a lot of the pressure is right now is among the highest paid, most likely to be employed, most credentialed workers, whereas other people that are sort of rank and file might not actually feel it that much.
That's fascinating. Guy Berger, Director of Economic Research at Burning Glass Institute. Guy, thanks a lot. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.